Alright, today we'll discuss about some interesting book, The Laws of Human Nature. And Robert Greene's book, The Laws of Human Nature, is basically a manual for understanding why people act irrational, manipulative, jealous, ambitious, insecure, and sometimes brilliant, often in the same hour. And the first shock Greene throws at you is simple. You are not as rational as you think. So, let's start with the story. Around 2400 years ago, in Athens, there was a leader named Pericles. Unlike most politicians, he was weird in one specific way. He refused to react emotionally, while others screamed in the debates and pushed wars for glory. Pericles would literally go home and think alone for days before making a decision. Imagine that today. A politician saying, "Hold on, I need a few days to think." Especially that's not possible with a Trump and Twitter or whatever X explode. But because he slowed it down emotionally, Athens entered a golden age. Art, science, architecture, the Parthenon democracy expanding. Then Pericles died. And what happened next? Emotion took over politics again. Greed, revenge, pride. Athens launched a massive military campaign to conquer Sicily, an emotional decision driven by excitement and ambition. Result: catastrophic defeat. Thousands dead. Eventually, Athens lost the entire war. And one calm leader disappeared, and the emotional system of humans took over. And that pattern, Greene argues, never changed. And it's another uncomfortable truth thing about the brain. Your brain has two systems operating at the same time. One is the emotional brain, like ancient, fast, impulsive. The other is thinking brain, slow, analytical. The problem that the emotional brain evolved millions of years earlier. In other words, emotional brain much older and logical brain younger. That's why people in general do stupid things more, because that part of the brain evolutioned early. So it's basically the older, stronger roommate in your school. Neuroscientists like Antonio Damasio and Joseph Ledoux have shown that emotions fire in the brain before rational thought even begins processing. Meaning, you don't decide. First, you feel. Then your brain invents a story explaining the feeling. And Greene described it like this. Emotions push us toward ideas that soothe our ego, not ideas that are actually correct. That's why people believe ridiculous things with full confidence. And not because they are stupid, but because the brain is trying to protect identity. Okay, let's make a modern example. The financial crash of 2008. And after the crash, everyone blamed. Like banks, regulation, government, derivatives, complex models. But Greene points out something brutal. Millions of people choose to invest in risky assets. Millions ignored warning signs. Why? Because they saw others making easy money. Emotion spreads socially. Greed becomes contagious. And suddenly people start behaving like gamblers in a casino. History has seen the same pattern. Things like 1720 South Sea Bubble or 1840s railway mania, 1929 stock crash. Same emotional cycle. Greed, which goes to euphoria, which goes to denial, and after to the panic. Different centuries, same human brain. And now here's where the book gets really interesting. Greene says the biggest problem is not other people, it's your blind spot about yourself. Ask anyone, are you rational? And most people will say yes. But look at real behavior patterns. No one admits that they're stupid. And people repeat the same relationship mistakes, the same career mistakes, the same financial mistakes. And every time they explain it like this: bad luck, wrong people, circumstances, but rarely they will say like, maybe I was emotional. Like most people lacking this kind of self-reflection. And Greene calls this low-grade irrationality, not like dramatic stupidity, something more subtle. Your mood silently shaping decisions. Like in other words, you think that you're doing most all the time like rational decisions, but actually we just logically justifying our first emotional thought. For example, you wake up irritated, small stress, bad sleep. Later, someone makes a neutral comment, but because your brain is already irritated, you interrupt it as a disrespect. Argument starts, like relationship damage. Next day, you think, why did that even happen? And your emotion hijack the interpretation, the emotional brain filter reality. And here's another example everyone recognizes: envy. Nobody likes admitting envy, so the brain translates envy into something else. Criticism. You don't say, for example, I wish I had what he has. Instead, you say he's overrated. In other words, most people, instead of like taking like someone's success like motivation, they start to be jealous, and they could blame anything but themselves about their fucked up life. So, in other words, emotion goes transferring to translation, then to the rational story. Again, like you justifying you logically start to justifying your emotional thought, and your brain protects the ego. And Greene's key insight is powerful. Rationality is not natural; it is a skill, something you train. Just like a physical fitness, the brain's like a default mode is reaction, and rationality means slowing down that reaction. So, what does that actually look like in daily life? Greene suggests something surprisingly simple. Step 1: observe your emotional triggers. Notice patterns. What makes you defensive? What makes you angry? What makes you insecure? Most people never investigate their own reactions. They treat emotions like facts, but emotions as signals, not truth. Step 2: create distance from the moment. Pericles used to to literally leave political debates to calm down before deciding. Or I like another analogy that you gotta approach the first idea that come up to your mind like a stranger at the street. Like you're not hugging and kissing and giving a handshake to any stranger, right? You first of all try to recognize, is that like person you familiar, or you know him, or maybe he's dangerous. And the same way you're approaching new ideas without blindly following them. Or in modern life, the equivalent might be not replying immediately to a message, not reacting instantly to criticism, not making big decisions when excited. Emotion wants speed. Rationality requires delay. Step 3. Expand perspective. Emotions narrow thinking. They make us obsess about one interpretation. Rational thinking asks, what else could explain this? In other words, instead of having like a yes or no or black and white thinking, you think about other explanations to zoom out and see the whole picture instead of like having tunnel vision. And maybe the person was not insulting you. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe they didn't even notice. The moment you consider alternative explanations, emotional certainty weakens. Now, here's a funny paradox. People think emotional reactions show strength, but actually the strongest people are often the calmest, because calmness allows strategy. And Greene points out something fascinating about influence. When someone attacks emotionally and you stay calm, it destabilizes them, because emotional people expect emotional reactions, because they also want to make you emotional, and they kind of understand that when you like losing your shit and becoming emotional, you do stupid things. So the strategy is to not allow to that kind of shit happening. Calmness breaks their script. It gives you control of the interaction. And another good thing about it is that when you calm and you're not emotionally leaking information about you, like about what you think, that kind of thing actually makes them even more scared, because they don't know what to expect. And that's the point. You never allow someone else to reverse engineer your thought pattern. Otherwise, it's going to be easy to control you. Another powerful idea in the book is something Greene calls the higher self versus lower self. And the lower self wants comfort, attention, status, immediate pleasure. The higher self wants understanding, long-term achievement, creative work, meaning. So the problem is the lower self is louder. It screams, because as we talked previously, it's related with the ancient emotional brain. The higher self whispers. Yeah, that's a good point. In other words, the logical brain, it is super powerful and of course way smarter than emotional brain, but you gotta catch the wave, and let your like logical brain be calm and kind of shut down your emotional brain. And it doesn't mean like you have to suppress your emotion. You're just labeling your emotion, but you're not letting yourself to immediately react on it. So if you live only reacting emotionally, the lower self ruins your life. But if you practice awareness, you start hearing the quieter voice. There's actually a great line Greene references from Dostoevsky that captures this perfectly. Sometimes it feels like two people live inside you, one rational and one impulsive, and suddenly you notice yourself wanting to do something ridiculous for no clear reason. That's the emotional self taking the wheel. So, what is the ultimate skill Greene wants you to build? He calls it becoming a strategic observer of human nature. And instead of reacting emotionally to people, you start studying them. You notice patterns, you see insecurities behind arrogance, you see envy behind criticism. In other words, you see what is actually behind the curtains instead of judging a book by its cover. You see fear behind aggression. And once you see the emotional drivers of behavior, people become much easier to understand, even predictable, because you already know their pattern. And here's the unexpected side effect. You become calmer because you stop taking everything personally. Someone insults you, maybe they are insecure. Someone undermines you, maybe they feel threatened. Someone ignores you, maybe they're trapped in their own drama. And most human behavior is not about you. It's about their internal emotional storm. Because no one sees actual reality. Everyone lives in his own perception based on their past experience, knowledge, you name it. And understanding this removes half the emotional noise in life. So, if we reduce the whole book to one practical rule, it is this. Before acting, observe the emotion. Not suppress it, just notice it. Because the moment you observe an emotion, it loses a bit of control. It is like how can I say? It's like when you do something and you doing that blindly, and on another hand, when you do something and you see that someone watching you, so you gaining control. And in that tiny space between emotion and action, real intelligence appears. That's the moment where the inner Athena Greene talks about finally shows up. And that's the difference between someone who constantly reacts and someone who actually shapes their life. I hope it was interesting, and see you next time. Smash the like button, subscribe button, and leave a comment.